They're lining up.
Well, they're excited.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sons of Mjolnir. As always, I am one of your hosts, Fat Thor.
I'm Gorgon.
And I'm Cop.
And today we have an extra special episode for all of you guys. Today we are joined by the Ringo Award-winning writer of such books as Spencer and Locke, The Oz, Going to the Chapel, and now he is bringing his talents to Marvel with the absolutely amazing Savage Avengers that we are all absolutely head over heels for. He's also written 2 issues of Fantastic Four with Judgment Day that just came out recently. And he's also written the Avengers as a team on Marvel's Unlimited with their Infinity series that they got going on. So without further ado, David Pepose, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
We're super excited to have you today.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here, and happy to chat about all things comics. It's a great way to spend a Sunday.
Hell yeah, absolutely. So
The best way some would say.
Yep, exactly. So let's just jump right into it. Doing some research on you a little bit, and we heard that you come from a family of third generation comic nerds. So wanted to kind of get your perspective on that a little bit. What was it like growing up in a comic family? Your kind of introduction to comics?
I like you said, I'm a third generation comics fan. My mother was a comics fan. My grandfather was a comics fan. We always say it was sort of one of the family tragedies is that my grandfather passed before I really before they knew that I was like a big comics fan, before I could really read. And my grandmother not knowing what they were worth throughout all of his comics. And it's one of the things we always say, they could have paid for my college with those comics. But yeah, I remember as a kid, my introduction to comics was my parents got me like a handful of comics in like 92, 91, 92. They got me like Amazing Spider-Man 346. That was Spidey versus Venom right before they wound up on the island together. Captain America fighting the Ice Worm. I don't remember which issue that is. There was a Peter David issue of the Hulk where he fights the Abomination. He pours like toxic waste on his face. And then an issue of Silver Surfer, I think it was 42, where Silver Surfer's barely in it. It's Adam Warlock fighting Drax the Destroyer, but I was like, that's cool. I'm into that. I think the thing that really catalyzed it for me was shortly thereafter, my father, I believe, got me a copy of Infinity War #2. And if you should look up the cover if you haven't seen it. It's this big crazy crowd fight between all of the Marvel heroes, and it blew my mind to realize like, oh, these characters who they're really cool. I think they're interesting. They all know each other, and that really kind of put me on the path now for a lifelong career, I hope. And so I feel like I'm probably the most hardcore about it. I think the story got worse as it passed along. But I remember my mother, who is stubborn and sometimes argumentative. I remember she was saying, well, I know how Lex Luthor lost his hair. And I was like, well, he shaves his head. That's what it says in this Grant Morrison comic. I remember the next day there was a printout taped to my door of like a Silver Age comic where like Lex was doing an experiment and Superboy accidentally used his super breath thinking there was a fire going on, and that's how Lex lost his hair in the Silver Age.
So, she's like, well, actually,
yeah. But yeah, I like to think that it wasn't a misspent youth, and if anything, it was just I it's a long and winding road to get here, but looking back on it, I see like I wouldn't have gotten here without any of those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's super cool. I feel like a lot of people, especially kids, it's like trying to convince your parents to buy you comic books. But in your situation, it was kind of already there.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, as I got older, and I think as the obsession quickly became apparent, there definitely were some periods where my parents were like, aren't you going to read some like other books? And I was like, no, I got all my comics. I've got however many boxes of them. And
yeah, right.
When I went to college, I carried them all with me. And it was funny how every year I'd seem to come back with more boxes. And yeah, that's a trend that continues to this day.
I would say I don't think the box collection ever stops. I think
Yeah.
that just continuously
Bigger
grows.
apartments.
Yep, exactly. You need a bigger house, bigger apartment, bigger storage.
Yeah.
But you mentioned one of your first issues was Spider-Man 346
Yeah.
with Spider-Man and Venom, and Gorgon here is our resident Venom expert, so I know he's got something he wants to say about that issue specifically.
I'm curious because you started with an incredible issue with Venom.
Yeah.
Like let's that was a phenomenal run in Venom's history. Starting out with it, I'm curious, have you kept reading Venom, and if so, what are your thoughts on how far Venom has progressed as a character since we were kids?
Oh, definitely. I mean, Venom was one of my favorite characters as a kid. I mean, and I think because it stems from that early comic, Maximum Carnage, I was obsessed with. That '90s Spider-Man run in general. I know the Clone Saga gets a bad rap, but I mean, I grew up in the '90s, so like I stuff.
Same.
I ate it
Yeah,
up.
we love it.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan. Donny Cates's run I thought was spectacular. And I've been reading what Al and Ram have been doing on the current Venom side of things. In part just to kind of make sure that I'm playing by the rules with everything with Flash Thompson. So yeah, no, he's a terrific character, and he strikes me. I'm so glad to see that he's sort of become a perennial Marvel character now. I mean, I think about this often, where it's kind of, what are the Marvel characters that that like come hell or high water, there's going to be a series with them. Like the Avengers or Iron Man, or Thor or Captain America or something like that. And Venom was not always one of those characters. He'd be popular in waves. He'd have a mini series here, he'd have a limited run there. And now it's kind of, I see him as a real pillar for the Marvel universe, and that's really cool. I really appreciate that, and yeah, the symbiotes, they're fun characters, and I like the way that lots of different writers have tried lots of different things with these characters, and so there's a nice like kind of vibrant ecosystem that sometimes doesn't really get its just spotlight, and so it's kind of nice to see that happening now. It's been fun sort of playing, granted in my own very kind of removed corner of that, but it's been a fun little nod. I especially think writing Flash Thompson, it really is in certain ways writing the best of Spider-Man and Venom in one character.
I feel like I can speak for a lot of the symbiote community that one of our favorite things about Savage Avengers and you writing Flash Thompson is that you've incorporated some of his earlier times with the anti-venom symbiote from before it was sentient and conscious, right?
Yeah.
Having the feral mode, like we got way back when, yet you've also kept him with wings, which we got in his rebirth in Kate's run.
Yeah.
And I think symbiote fans have really loved that you have just been able to incorporate all of the best parts of him with that into your run and make it make sense through time.
Yeah.
I thank you for that. It's nice to see.
I think the great thing about long running characters like Flash and a lot of the Marvel characters is, yeah, for me, I if anything, my editors usually have to rein me in and be like, hey, that you can't do that for XYZ reason. For me, I'm just like, well, let's show off these characters at their best and at their most imaginative. And I love especially the characters in Savage Avengers, where their power sets are a little more nuanced, and so you can really do a lot of interesting things with them, like Flash sort of toggling between sort of his traditional agent anti-venom form versus a more feral form, because the based on the mechanism of his resurrection, that seemed open to do. And the great thing is, when Savage Avengers ends, is that, because there's sort of that time travel element baked in, that's something that if a future writer wants to pick up on it, great. If they don't want to pick up on it, they can say, well, that's just the time travel, and so it's a nice way to kind of be a little conscientious, to put the toys back in the box for whoever the next writer is, tackling that character. But yeah, I'm always kind of constantly thinking, what's something interesting that we could do with this character and their abilities that we haven't seen yet, and that's often a lot of the brainstorming that goes into my Marvel work.
You've commented before on Twitter with some of like something similar to that, particularly with regarding God, I just lost my brain. Weapon H. And your changes with him to it. You've commented before like how much research you've done on like all of his different appearances and his things. Was that very similar, and you were just like, cool, this is what's been done, like how crazy can we go?
Yeah, I mean, well, so what happened with Weapon H was, you know, when I pitched Savage Avengers, I said, you know, I want to have a team. I want to have like a constant team, because you know, Jerry Dugan did such a fantastic job in the first run that it's one of those things you want to honor that, but you want to take your own spin on it. And so I think I pitched Savage Avengers in a lot of ways as a mirror image to what Jerry did. You know, instead of having Conan in our world, we would bring our world to Conan, or to Conan's world, and having, I think, a dedicated team versus sort of Conan bopping around and teaming up with varying different, you know, characters in the Marvel universe. And so I had said, you know, I think to maintain the promise of Jerry's original roster, that you know, Wolverine, Punisher, Elektra, Doc Voodoo, and Venom. I wanted to have something. I was like, we need a symbiote. I'd like to keep Elektra, and I need somebody with claws. And I had originally pitched Daken, Dark Wolverine, you know, just because I've always really loved the character. But you know, at the time, you know, he was being used over in Marauders, and it's one of those things. I find that's probably the biggest learning curve at Marvel, is that, you know, you'll pitch something, but you have no idea who's using them. You know, it's sort of the your editors are kind of the ones seeing the big picture, where they're able to kind of say, hey, like, I can't tell you how many times I pitched MODOK before we got sort of our MODOK in issue 7. And, you know, I was like, oh, I want to do, you know, could we do for Avengers Unlimited? I was like, could we have MODOK as bad guy? And I was like, well, Jerry Dugan's using him over in X-Men, so like you probably want to steer clear. You know, and so you have to really think of like a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. And so for Daken, yeah, I was like, hey, he's actually going to be used in Marauders, and Logan himself, it was kind of like, well, he's doing Lives and Deaths of Wolverine coming up, which hasn't been announced yet. So like he's already kind of in his own time travel thing. We don't want to repeat that. So, you know, I was like, well, you know, who could we throw in there? And it was Tom Brevoort, my editor, who was like, well, you know, just to throw a name out there, what do you think about Weapon H? You know, like he's kind of raw materials and nobody's really using him right now. And I'll admit, my initial reaction was like, really, Weapon H? Like, you know, I had read Greg Pak and Corey Smith's work on the character and really enjoyed it, but I was just like, and then, but you know, after that initial kind of feeling of resistance, I was like, wait a minute, no, that's actually, it's a perfect fit. You know, he's got the lineage of 2 of Marvel's most savage characters, and looking back on it, you know, not having a Hulk on the Savage Avengers team is almost like an oversight. And so what I remember pitching to Tom, I was like, listen, like you said, you know, he's kind of raw materials, nobody's doing anything with him. What if we did something that was like Dial H for Hulk, where we, you know, I had just been reading Immortal Hulk run, which has all the gamma mutates in it. And I was like, well, why don't we just combine and condense all that into the series? And so that way he's not just the guy who slashes and smashes, he's the guy who can transform into a Red Hulk or a Harpy or a Leader or an A-Bomb. And that gives him like all sorts of interesting things to do. So yeah, it's really cool that Tom let me do that. And I think some of that also comes down to the time travel of it all, because like with Flash Thompson, you know, whoever picks up Clay next does not have to listen to this. You know, they don't have to incorporate it. It's sort of a way to kind of make him a little bit more of a utility player, a little more unpredictable. And yeah, I think he fit really nicely. And you know, there was, I remember it was between Weapon H and another Claude character who I won't reveal. And I remember really agonizing over it, and I look back and I don't regret the choice I made one bit. Clay really, he works visually. Carlos, I think Carlos Magno, the my artist on this book, draws Weapon H magnificently. So I think it really worked out in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, we agree. We think you made a great choice, and not only that, but whoever does pick up Weapon H next, I hope they continue with what you did, because I mean, it's just freaking, it's cool. It's just, there's no way around it. It's cool. And speaking of the artists, Magnoy, right?
Yeah,
I don't
Carlos.
want to. I don't
Yeah,
want to
Carlos
butcher the
Magno.
name. Yeah. So I also want to bring him up a little bit. We absolutely love his work, not only on Savage, his work in general, but I had to bring this up knowing that you're coming on and that he's your artist.
Yeah.
We are all super huge fans of his Kang miniseries that he did. That was one of our favorite books, I think, of that year. So yeah, like I said, his art is just so good, and like you just said, the way he draws Weapon H, and even I think Elektra, Daredevil, is so crisp and it's so good.
His take on Cloak might be the coolest the characters looked in a very long time. I can't say enough good things about Carlos. Just both as like an artist and like as a human being. He is such a talented and just genuinely nice guy. The Savage Avengers was my very first work at Marvel. I know I worked on like Elektra, Black, White, and Blood, and Moon Knight, Black, White, and Blood, but all of that, it came well into my tenure in Savage Avengers, even if some of those came out before Savage Avengers was published. And I had to really it was a steep learning curve. I really kind of had to figure out like it's not just writing a comic, which I've done that a few times, but it's how do you navigate the way that Marvel puts a comic together, and there's really no instruction manual to it. It really you learn by doing, but I think it requires a certain degree of nerves of steel.
I would imagine,
just because like nobody's going to sit and hold your hand and be like, this is how we do things. Like if you have a question, typically you can ask, but otherwise, like you don't want to bug your editors, with all that. And Carlos was really patient with me, and just really gracious, like especially, as we were starting to get to learn how to work together, like I always have a lot of ideas and notes in the layout stage, just because like I cram a lot into my scripts, and so I already had kind of an idea of like how do I think it all fits together. And there are other artists who probably want to kill me for how talkative I can be over all this stuff, but Carlos, he took it in stride. Just a genuinely nice guy. And what's so crazy about all that is that like not only is he so nice and not only is he so talented, as you can see by the final product on the page, but that he's fast. He is like insanely fast. For me, it was constantly, it was sort of feeling like a Terminator was bearing down on me, where it's like, okay, like I know I have to turn in a script by this day because I cannot leave Carlos waiting.
Yeah. Carlos just sitting there with a pencil like, David, come on, man.
Like, he usually, I mean, I'm pretty sure he was on at least a page a day. And so the fact that, we were able to do this for 10 issues with no change in the creative team. That's kind of an achievement in today's marketplace. And so I can't say enough great things about working with Carlos. His Kang series that you were talking about was sort of my first exposure to him. And I was, and our colorist, Aspen Gruntadjern. And, they're a dream team. I think they're fantastic. And, everybody on that Kang book is terrific. Colin and Jackson are buddies of mine, and I really like them a lot, and they're talented to boot. So but yeah, Carlos, it's just I couldn't have asked for a better artist to kind of get me on the ground floor at Marvel, and so I will always be grateful to him, and I will drop whatever I have to work with him again.
Absolutely. Like you said, I think that man writes with a pen made of fire, like literal fire. But going kind of a little bit backwards to your kind of early comic journey, I was kind of curious as well. We saw that you mentioned Brubaker as kind of one of your influences, and we have our Cap expert over here. He loves the Brubaker run, obviously. So I know Cap has a couple of little question about kind of your experience with that run and Brubaker specifically. Cap, want to go ahead?
Yes. So how much like did the Brubaker run like influence any way you write at all?
Yeah, well, so for me, the Brubaker stuff that really impacted me the most was his work on Criminal, Last of the Innocent in particular. If you see that, you can really see like it's very easy to connect the dots between Last of the Innocent and like Afterlife with Archie going into Spencer and Locke, which is my Calvin and Hobbes meets Sin City book. Yeah, the thing that I really admire about Brubaker, and it's something that I'm always thinking about, although maybe I haven't quite mastered it yet, is that he says so much with so little. You know, I think he's a real true blue master of pacing. And I think that only comes with time and practice. You know, I mean, for me, I'm still in the stage, I write everything like it's the last thing I'm ever going to write, because, you know, one day it will be. But I think Brubaker, you know, Brubaker, you know, he's made his bones. He knows he's made his bones. And so he's able to kind of cool it a little bit in a way that isn't really my speed at the moment. But I think, you know, people like him and like Greg Rucka, I was just rereading Punisher Warzone. Somebody brought it up on Twitter, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna dig that up. I haven't read that in a minute. And you know, like those guys, like they write a lot with a little. And so that's something that's kind of on my to-do list to really incorporate more of. But yeah, I mean, you know, Brubaker is a huge talent. You know, his work with Matt Fraction on Immortal Iron Fist is really influential in me. I'd love to do something with Iron Fist one of these days. You know,
we would too.
His Capron was fantastic. I mean, you know, I don't think it's hyperbole to say, like, you know, I mean, I think we kind of peaked with Cap on that run. You know, I think everybody's been kind of chasing that run ever since, you know, and
100% agree.
You know, and that's actually something that I think about constantly, is like, what do you do for Cap that's not Brubaker? You know, like it's just it's so tied in the DNA now. Like what's a way to make him like viable and you know, as A-list as he deserves to be, and not sort of doing a cover band version of Ed. But yeah, I you know, but at the same time, you know, it's like one of those things. It's like Winter Soldier, you know, that sort of twist in retrospect feels perfectly organic to the character, and, you know, really built a supporting cast member that is impossible to replace. It's impossible to lose. You know, he's just as tied in there as Sam Wilson, you know? And I think it's one of those things, though, leading up to it, it's like, you know, the people in comics who stay dead are Jason Todd and Bucky Barnes. And, you know, now Uncle Ben's all alone in the graveyard.
I would say, yeah, Uncle Ben's the only one left.
Uncle Ben's the only one left. So yeah, too long didn't read. You know, Ed Brubaker rules. He's a real writer's writer, and I would love to be like half as talented as him. And I'm sure it will take me many years to get to that point, but I'm certainly going to try.
Well, we think you're well on your way, my friend. We think you're well on your way. And then also, Cap, what was that issue? The Frost Worm. I told you he's the expert. He knows which one.
That was
384.
It was Greenwald's run, wasn't it?
I think it's 384. Captain America.
It was Greenwald's run, wasn't it? And I might be butchering his surname. I'm not very good at surnames.
Yep, 384. Yep. That's
hey,
it.
See, I told you had it. So moving on a little bit, we talked about, you know, your influences and kind of your early comic career, but let's get into your comic career and your writing. So I want to talk about your kind of earlier books. Specifically, I kind of want to start with Spencer and Locke. You mentioned it very briefly before as the kind of Calvin and Hobbes meets Sin City. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, that was your first book that you wrote, and I can't remember where you said this, but I saw you said something along the lines of, when you wrote that book, that was kind of like your bucket list book, and it was like, at the time, if you were to never write another book again, you wanted to just kind of put everything you wanted into that book. So now So
you did the research. Yeah.
say I try. But now that you've written more books and you have had the opportunity to write more after Spencer and Locke, do you still feel that it is your bucket list book, or do you have maybe a new book that is your bucket list book now that you've written some more things, kind of had more experience under your belt?
It's a great question. It is the best first book I could have possibly asked for. You know, I love that book. You know, I think I've grown as a writer a little bit since that first book, like just in terms of like skill and confidence in the work. But yeah, you know, it's one of those things that you know, maybe there are some people out there who are like, I'm going to be a career writer, and they go out with their first book and they know, well, this is just the first book, and like, and then I'm going to do the second one and the third and whatever. I wasn't nearly as confident with it. You know, it took me a long time to even get to the point of writing a comic. And even then, at the time when I had done it, it was sort of, I kind of had put the cart before the horse, that I was like, well, if I can say that I've published a book, then maybe I can kind of work my way into editorial or development on the TV side, you know, just to say, oh, I can break down a story if I can prove that I can put one together. And, you know, I'd been a reviewer for, I think 7 or 8 years at that point. And it took all that theory that I had built over years of being a reviewer, after nearly a year interning at DC in editorial, just to kind of barely get that book across the finish line. Like, it really, I mean, we left it all in the field for that first volume. And yeah, you know, it's still my baby. I'm super proud of it. The book still sells really well at conventions. Yeah, you know, it was just, I didn't know if I was going to be a writer when I started it. And it wasn't until the book came out that I was like, maybe I have a shot at this, you know, and maybe I'll start working on some other material. So yeah, I mean, you know, I really want to revisit Spencer and Locke at some point. You know, we're waiting until we can get the rights back from the publisher, just because they've sort of had a whole slew of things that they have not lived up to their end of the bargain. You know, and so it's not, you know, George Santiago Jr. and I were in agreement that it's sort of like, it's not worth kind of digging into the third volume until we get the rights back. But I do want to do that. And I will say there's something in the concept of volume 3 that actually makes the time jump very organic. So yeah, I think as far as beyond that, you know, like bucket list books, you know, I always love writing. I mean, at least in the licensed sphere, I always love writing team books. You know, you know, writing an Avengers book as my first title at Marvel is kind of like a pinch me moment. You know, I've wanted to write the Avengers for many years, and you know, getting to write them in Avengers Unlimited has been particularly fun. So I think, let's see, beyond that, you know, I love Spider-Man. You know, he's one of my favorites. You know, getting to write him would be pretty rad. Doctor Strange is probably like my bucket list guy at Marvel.
Okay.
I've had an idea for Strange that's been like burning in my back pocket for like 10 years. And knock on wood, so far it doesn't look like anybody's done anything like it. So
could that be Project Sweet Potato maybe? Or
no, I love Project Sweet Potato. That is a creator owned, that has been in the works for a couple of years now. It's been fully written. It's a long project. It's 150 pages, and my poor artist, you know, she's drawn it as much as fast as she can, but you know, I gave her 30-page issues for this project. So yeah, we just hit the 40% mark just last week. So yeah, I'm hoping I can start talking about that in the next year or so.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know we probably can't get anything out of you about it, but I had to bring it up.
No, I can. The thing is like, in like a month, you guys will hear about some new Marvel work coming. And
mark your calendars, ladies and gentlemen.
A few months after that, you'll hear about kind of what my next big thing for 2023 is. Yeah, I've been they've been keeping me nice and busy over there, which is wonderful. All the office has been really terrific. In fact, I have a short that I'm working on this weekend, probably after this podcast, that like is kind of one of those characters that I'm just like, I'm surprised that I got asked. It's a massive character, to the point where I'm kind of glad that this is just a short, so I don't like. I think I might be too intimidated to like do a long-term thing with them.
I mean, that just has my mind racing. I mean, you've written Ultron, Doom. What could be bigger than that? I don't know.
Well, when you see, you'll be like, oh.
So, like I said, mark your calendars, everybody.
Mark your calendars. So yeah, I think it's a tricky balancing act, and it's one that I've been trying to work really hard to keep up. Is just like I want to keep up with my licensed work. Of course, Marvel's been a wonderful home to work for, and everybody's been really supportive and given me a ton of latitude that I honestly would never have expected before I got there. But also, like, I still want to do original work, and so sometime this year you should be hearing about another original piece, another original series that I've got coming out sometime this year. With an artist who I've really admired for a long time, and super friendly guy, and the things that he's been showing me, I'm like, oh, that looks really sharp. I guess the one and only thing I can say is it's my first horror series, although the way that things are scheduling out, it might not be my first published horror work.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, very really excited for that one to come out.
Ooh, that is super exciting. You on some horror?
I've never done it before. I've never done it before, but I can say, like, Project Viridian, that's horror. That kind of materialized fairly recently. And then Project Pitchfork, which has kind of been in the works for a while. Those are both horror, and I'm very proud of how they both turned out, although they're very different in terms of like their tone and angle.
Oof, I have to say, as our resident madman, I label things in my life with little code names as well. It's a running joke that I have Google documents saved with code names. How do you come up with your little madman code names for things?
Yeah, it's always sort of what's like a connection that I'll remember, and that I don't mind talking about long term. So like for the OZ, for example, I called that Project Saffron for a long time. And Going to the Chapel was a Project Cake, just because for the wedding cake. So it's just, what's something that I can remember. There's always a connection there. And some of them are more apparent than others. Like, I think like Project Gemini, they're going to talk about, I think that's end of April that I'll be able to talk about that. And I'm pretty sure when like you find out what it is, it'll make like perfect sense why I called it that. Same thing with like Project Jet Black, that like I just got approval on that Friday.
We just saw that on Twitter yesterday.
Yeah, and you'll hear about that pretty soon. And you'll be like, oh, that makes plenty of sense. But when you said that. So like I always try to like get some sort of connection, but some of them like Project Sweet Potato, like it's not me really playing fair. Like there's a connection to me there that like I understand it, but like nobody who doesn't know me like fairly well would know that connection. But
I love sweet potatoes.
so does the lead character in this book.
Okay.
It's one of those things. It's a little weird to say it now, knowing everything we know about him now. But it was something that I did take from like the Warren Ellis like playbook. That like this is a career that it can be pretty solitary, and like the development times, while not Hollywood level, there's still a long time. I mean, like my book Grand Theft Astro, like it's been written for ages. It's just we're sort of slowly putting together art on it. And not being able to talk about this stuff would drive me nuts. So this is kind of my way of like being able to kind of split it a little bit, where like I can't say, you know, I'm trying to remember what the Avengers Unlimited one was. I don't even remember what I called it. But like Savage Avengers, I called Project Sledgehammer for a long time. And like being able to like be like, oh, Project Sledgehammer got approved, and it's like the biggest thing I've ever done, and I'm excited to be working on that. And oh, hey, you want to find out what Project Sledgehammer is? It's you know, or Fantastic Four for a while. I called that Project Skyscraper. And
okay, I get that. Fitting.
You know,
makes sense.
It's just a way to kind of be able to talk a little bit about what I'm actually working on, and let people know like I'm not just like sitting here, you know, like waiting for work, for doors to open. I'm constantly working. In fact, the next time I write a newsletter, which I've been long lax in doing, it's just because I've been writing nonstop for like 6 months. But you know, I don't know. It's a nice way to kind of share things and get people hyped up, and it feels good for me too, just to be able to say, okay, Project Viridian script got turned in, and hey, my editor didn't even have any notes on it. Like it's just it's my way to have my cake and eat it too.
Nice. Yeah, like you said, you can talk about it without talking about it, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned
go ahead, Gorgon.
You mentioned your Fantastic Four issues, and I have to say, I'm glad you mentioned you enjoy writing team up books, because we have loved how well your Savage Avengers feels. Like I feel like you master team up books in a way a lot of people struggle with. It seems like you're able to give every character their perfect time to shine without making it too much about one or the other. You're able to give them all moments to grow. And I feel like that translated so well, even to your few issues of Fantastic Four. They were some of Twitter's most talked about issues within that event. It was very much a soup book, but the way you wrote Reed, even people who don't like Reed Richards, like me, who doesn't trust to Reed Richards at all, shoot that man on sight, enjoyed what you were doing. What did it feel like to get to write them as another team-up book, as big as they are in Marvel's history?
Yeah, boy, it was really daunting. You know, it's funny. I have this habit where like I'll be talking with my partner, and she'll be like, oh, what are some like Marvel characters that you'd like to write next? And I always tend to say something like, well, this is a character that I'd really be good at, and then I'll follow it up by being like, boy, but this book would be really challenging. I don't know what I would do with this book. And then like invariably like a week later, I get an email about that book. And so Fantastic Four was exactly one of those where I was like, I had literally said like a week or two prior, I was like, oh, Fantastic Four, like I don't envy like whoever's picking up after Dan Slott, because like they're a tough group to figure out, because I think readers often give the Fantastic Four a bad rap by like thinking they're like a little antiquated, you know. They're the prototype of sort of the Stan Lee model that kind of got perfected, I think, with Spider-Man. And so of course I get an email about Fantastic Four, and it's so funny that when somebody asks you to write these characters, you quickly figure out, well, what do I like about these guys? Like what can I find about them that's really interesting? And it's funny that Tom Brevoort, my Savage Avengers editor and editor on Fantastic Four, he and I were instantly simpatico about, like, my first thought before I even finished reading the email was, you know, a Sue Storm centric story would be great. And then as I finished the email, Tom's like, I think something Sue focused would be like a good idea. Like we haven't, you know, she hasn't done as much, you know, lately. And so I think to answer your question a little bit, I love team books. You know, like you know how the theory in evolution where everything evolves towards a crab. For me, like all of my books tend to evolve towards a team book, even if they're not meant to be. You know, I think at minimum I'm always throwing in like supporting characters. Like Project Rover was built as, it was, you know, that's a book that's supposed to be starring one character, but I pretty much instantly was like, I'm gonna make it a buddy team up. You know, and a buddy team up, and also like we're gonna have like a huge team of villains in this. So like I love writing lots of crowds. I think Going to the Chapel really kind of instilled that one in me. That's a book with I think a 15 or 16 person cast, and you know, we're checking in with every single one of them every single issue. So yeah, I think as far as the FF are concerned, I think, you know, it's a book that's sentimental, and I think that people, not everybody, but I think a lot of people, they do enjoy. They can feel something with that kind of earnestness. And yeah, you know, I think it's ultimately comes down to like, yeah, they're a family with each of them having their own dysfunctions, but like they ultimately, like, they love and care for each other, and they step up when they need to. And so yeah, being able to kind of figure out ways to juggle all that was an interesting challenge. You know, you only have 40 pages to do it. Read especially. Read is tough. I mean, there are a lot of smarter writers out there than me, but I feel like writing a script with Reed Richards made the thing like 3 times harder than like a normal script. I tend to write in a way that like I imagine that like film or sound editors tend to put their stuff together, where there's different tracks. You know, you write your panels out just to get the visual side, and then you write the dialogue, and then oftentimes I like to throw in captions, whether it's an omniscient narrator like Savage Avengers, or a first person narration like in Fantastic Four, just because you only have a limited amount of page real estate, and I want to get the most amount of information out there. And so that's kind of an accepted way to do it. But Reed, you know, even kind of tackling him the way that I wanted to tackle him, which was, you know, I think he gets a bad rap. I think everybody, like you said, I don't trust Reed Richards, shoot him on sight. I think a lot of people see him that way. You know, they see him as cold or aloof, or, you know, ungrateful, you know, like not really taking Sue for granted. And I kind of wanted to interrogate that a little bit, and just be like, no, like Reed is a man who's in love with his wife, and that ultimately all these amazing things, all these fantastic things that Reed has done, none of them exist without Sue Storm. None of them happen. She's sort of the inspiration, and I think, you know, in certain ways she is his Tinkerbell. You know, like Sue believes in Reed, and so Reed is able to do what Reed can do.
I love that. That's beautiful.
And you know, some of that's a little autobiographical. I mean, you know, I always say, I tell my partner all the time, like, you know, I wouldn't have a writing career if I hadn't met her. I mean, I started writing scripts in part because I had some ideas, and I never really ever finished those ideas. And early on when I met her, I was like, oh, I have this idea for this screenplay, and she was really excited. And so I was like, oh, I guess I got to write it, you know. And that's sort of how, you know, I don't send in scripts without her reading it. I just don't.
Awesome.
You know, so and I can say that that Fantastic Four 2-parter was certainly her favorite thing I've written at Marvel. So mission accomplished. Yeah, no, it's one of those themes that, like, I think looking back on it, I think it was, you know, somebody who's kind of still feels fairly new at Marvel. They seemed too big to me. You know, it was one of those, there's so much history, there's so much expectation. You know, they were Stan's babies, and, you know, who am I to closing out a run on Stan's babies? And but I think when, you know, to sort of paraphrase the Calvin and Hobbes strip a little bit, you know, panic is a great motivator. And when somebody asks, hey, do you want to write Fantastic Four? You know, yeah, they're huge, larger than life characters with so much history and pressure and expectation, but also you don't say no to that. When that opportunity knocks, you answer it, and you answer it as best you can, and you find the emotional hook, and you find the fun in it. And that, I think, has been kind of my favorite part about writing at Marvel in general, is there are characters who at first blush, even I would be like, I don't know if that's like for me. I don't know if that's my speed. I don't know if I've got an angle for them. And invariably, when I then get asked to write those characters, I quickly find an angle of something that I'm like, oh, if I wanted to tell a story starring, I'm not going to say the name, but like, you know,
you can say it. Don't. It's okay. You can say it.
You know, what would I say? You know, and in certain ways, those sort of shorter bursts are almost a little more freeing, just because you don't even have to think about sort of what's the long-term implications here. You can just do a badass 2-part story about Die Hard and the Baxter Building with Weebly at Midas.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
And yeah, so it's been a real treat. I really like working over there, and expect more cool things to come from me and the House of Ideas.
It
Perfect.
definitely made me, like I said, I really appreciate and enjoy what you did with Reed. It's probably one of my favorite things I've read with him as a while. So coming from someone who is anti-Reed, I feel like that's saying something.
I would say that was probably your
You're
favorite
my target
read.
demo.
Yeah, that was probably your favorite read ever, probably, right, Gorgon?
Absolutely, it's right up there with
Maker?
Venom Beyond's read, where he's just lost his absolute mind and he's just gonk brained. Yeah. So I very much enjoyed it.
I'll say thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say really quickly before we get off Fantastic Four, we were talking about this before we started recording, but I, like you were saying, you put Sue in the forefront, and I really, as someone who hasn't read Fantastic Four in a long time, my kind of, when I think of Fantastic Four, I think of like the very old school kind of Stan Lee kind of stuff, and no diss to the creators and to the ones who paved the way, but I think we can all agree that women in comics at that time weren't written the best. So my idea of Sue is kind of, I feel like, stuck back then. So to see her like, one, in the forefront, and two, just her being badass, like I thought that was just so cool and very refreshing. I really love that.
Well, thank you. It's I think some of it is also comes down to my other dirty secret as far as favorite Marvel characters are concerned. The biggest compliment I can ever give a Marvel character is if I got to write the Avengers, would I consider them on my roster? And out of all of the Fantastic Four, it would have been Sue. And I think also just when it came to Judgment Day, she's the one that makes sense to me. Like Judgment Day is ultimately a story about faith in human nature. Do we deserve to survive? And what is faith if ultimately something you can't see but is invariably felt? And that's Sue.
Genius.
That's Sue's powers in a nutshell. So I feel like there was a lot to talk about with her in the context of this event, and I think I touched upon that a little bit in Reed's narration. But it's just like she's her power in a lot of ways is faith, and I think that fits in with the great Judgment Day scheme in a kind of fun way.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it like that. Even just the way you talk about it, it proves that you're the right man for the job, for sure. You understand this stuff. We've talked about Savage Avengers here and there as we've been talking, but I mean, let's really get into the meat and potatoes of it, as it were. Is it okay with you if we talk a little bit spoilers, or?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Perfect. So I wanted to this is really a Gorgon question, so I'll tee up for Gorgon. So I heard little birds on the street were telling me that you actually had another symbiotic character in mind before Anti-Venom. Gorgon, you want to enlighten us on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's I read somewhere that you originally planned for Carnage to be on the team. Now, is that true? And if so, how different would that have looked compared to what we have now with Flash, who seems to work so well, particularly with Cloak and Dagger, right? He's such a good in-between glue. I feel like Cletus and Carnage would be the antithesis to that it would almost be tearing the team apart from the inside.
Yeah, it's one of those things. You're right. Carnage was I had asked for Carnage originally, not knowing what Ram V had going on in his Carnage book, which I'm not even sure if that had been announced yet. I don't think it had. I had originally pitched Cletus joining the team as sort of like the ultimate loose cannon, and granted, this is before I had like Weapon H on there as well, but I had pitched it as Dark Wolverine sort of taking Flash's spot, and then Carnage is kind of the wild card where that opening fight was supposed to take place in like an Alchemax lab or a Life Foundation lab, and the Carnage symbiote was there, And so suddenly it's kind of one of those, do you trust Carnage, or does he like betray the team at like the worst possible moment? You know? And I just love Rick Remender had such an interesting voice for Carnage. And I really loved it a lot. Like kind of this like Southern hillbilly serial killer kind of voice. I think to me that's like the most entertaining I've found Carnage since like his 90s appearances. So yeah, I was very quickly told like, hey, like Carnage, you can't, like there are plans for him elsewhere, so we can't, you can't use him. And so Flash was my immediate backup, especially being told that Dark Wolverine wasn't on the table, because I was like, oh, Dark Wolverine is a fun character because like he can in character flirt with anybody on the team, and he's got the pheromones, so you know there are a lot of places I could take that. But yeah, I think I remember saying like Carnage, I would love to do Carnage, but Flash is a very easy backup, because just like Flash is a character, you know, I always say he's a douchebag, but he's our douchebag, you know, like I mean his very first appearances, like ignore him being in the military, ignore him you know having a symbiote, his very first appearance is he's a dickhead. And like you know but like he's a dickhead with a heart of gold, because he's also Spider-Man's like #1 fan. Like he's just, you know, he's the high school quarterback who's kind of an asshole. But like, so it made a lot of sense to me about like him and Dagger pairing off, you know, because of course like the high school quarterback and like the dance captain, like I mean, if you've been to high school, that happens all the time. And you know, poor Cloak is kind of like the shy geek who was like mustering up the urge to ask his lab partner to go out with him, and then suddenly she's like, oh, Flash is picking me up. You know, the Cloak and Dagger love triangle really kind of helped spur that on, and that was something I had asked for from the jump. That's something I've wanted to do with those characters for almost 15 years. You know, just because like that's such a core part of their characters is Cloak and Dagger, and so split them up. Like you know, like I think there are a lot of fans out there who got so mad at the idea of there being a love triangle with Cloak and Dagger, and I never want to be rude and be like, have you read a comic? But it's just rude. Like, it's like I think anybody who thought that I was going to treat Flash and Dagger as Endgame. No, that's part of the thing, guys. Like you have to throw in challenges to these characters, because the arc is them going is them setting things right. You know, so if you saw, you know, if you read issue 9 of Savage Avengers, you know, oh, like that dynamic was never meant to last, and that like it's all about Cloak finally confessing his feelings to Dagger, and Dagger realizing like who she's had in front of her this entire time. Come on, guys.
Yeah. Well, like you said, you have to have that rift in order to have that kind of conclusion, and him to realize that. Exactly. And without that, how will he ever get to that point?
You need to build a journey to get to the catharsis. And that's why, you know, when there were people who were very upset about turning the Savage Avengers into Deathbox, and I was like, guys, like I love comics readers. Yeah. I love comics readers, but it's like, guys, do you think this is how I'm ending my book? Please,
you can send them our way. We'll be rude to them.
You know, it's one of those things that I know. It's very the process of making a comic in general is there's a lot of mystery around it. It's not as well known as it could be. And then when you add in like the layers of additional secrecy is not the right word, but like, you know, of keeping quiet when it comes to licensed IP in a shared universe where you don't want to blow up somebody else's spot. People sometimes are understandably distrustful of how things go. You know, and it's kind of one of those, guys, like, I promise, as somebody, I've been reading these comics for many, many years. I've been writing comics for a decent number of years now. I promise, like, we're not ending the series without a conclusion. Like, you know, so many people have been asking me, like, is the book canceled? And I'm like, guys, I promise there's an ending. I'm not going to leave anything. You know, and things like, oh my God, you killed the Savage Avengers. And it's like,
Again, have you read a comic book before?
Really? I guess I got a bridge to sell you too.
Yeah.
You know, it's I wish that more people were understanding that, like, it's always about the journey, you know, like you have these cool landmarks, but they're all in service of the land of sticking the landing at the end and sort of getting these characters back to equilibrium, but, you know, with an added emotional catharsis that shows that they've earned it.
Yeah.
And so you have to throw lots of crazy stuff in there, whether it's a Flash Thompson love triangle or turning them all into deathlocks. You know, it's all in service to what is sort of this story as a greater whole.
Absolutely.
I want to say that's not writing for the trade. Like, I mean, I try to make sure every issue stands on its own 2 feet and has something interesting. But, you know, at the end of the day, like, this story is sort of it's a complete whole. You know, and so you want to make sure that you're writing for that, while making sure that each chapter is interesting enough to stand on its own 2 feet.
Definitely, yeah. And
Definitely.
Go ahead, Gorgon.
I was gonna say it definitely shows off that you're a fan of comics. When reading it, because of the things that you bring up, right? Like all the different things you did with Weapon H, you brought in Dagger's like different constructs he does. You threw in Elektra's hand magic.
The photon blade, man. Come on, the photon blade.
You brought up the spider car. You've brought it in. You have Flash Thompson making football jokes. Is there a fun, other cheesy thing from comic history coming up soon that we can expect and be excited for?
Yes, there's a big moment in issue 10. There's a big moment in issue 10 that, without spoiling it, it's something that I had wanted to do. I wanted to kind of spread out more along this arc as a whole. And I quickly realized what the limits are in a 20-page comic. And I can talk more about that after issue 10 comes out. I think as a compromise goes, it worked out. And Carlos drew it magnificently. But, you know, I think that's the thing that, call it my learning curve at Marvel, that I'm still working on. Is I'm constantly figuring out how much can you fit in 20 pages, you know, and to keep this as like a satisfying read, and knowing that, like, Savage Avengers, you have a little bit more wiggle room to kind of go a little crazy and a little overstuffed. You know, the book is not called Subtle Avengers, but you know, it's always figuring out, like, I don't want to write a comic that everyone's like, well, nothing happened here. You know, I'm probably fairly anti-decompressed in my storytelling. You know, books like the Babs Tarr run on Batgirl, for example. I love how, like, every chapter was kind of done in one, but there was like an overarching structure to it. So yeah, there is a big, cool, fun moment in issue 10 that, when it comes out, you'll see, like, it's something I had kind of wanted to hinge more of the second arc on, but my editor kind of was like, are you sure that you can fit that in 20 pages, and across multiple issues? And I literally, I was doing beat sheets like multiple times in my apartment, being like, can I fit this? Like, how? And I very quickly realized, like, no, this is way too overstuffed. I can't do it. It was challenging enough. Issue 9 was, I probably rewrote that issue more times than any issue since Conan's Goodbye in issue 5, just because I was like, okay, you have to deal with 6 possessed Savage Avengers plus Deathlock plus Punisher, give Punisher a backstory, plus Doom 2099 plus Ultron. That's a 10-man cast. And you know, you only have 20 pages to do it. And so but I feel good that I was able to kind of crowbar that moment into issue 10. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that is really interesting. Yeah, Black Knight's got a cool moment in there. Yeah, no, there's lots of cool stuff, and I will say, Miles has a really good moment in there that I'm really happy with. That I think kind of ties the run together, in a big way. Yeah, I will say the one goofy thing that, not goofy, but like the one thing I didn't get in the book that I apologize for, that I regret, that I tried to get in there, but we really couldn't fit it in, was Black Knight in his leather jacket. I tried.
That's what I was gonna ask you. We got the
tried.
photon blade. Where's the
I
jacket?
tried. So it's the one and only thing that I was told no in this, pretty much in this entire run. You know, besides like, oh hey, Dark Wolverine's being used elsewhere, Carnage being used elsewhere. The only thing I was ever told no on was, I had originally pitched it as, well, listen, Black Knight, let's give him like, let's do the leather jacket and the photonic blade. And I think, I'm trying to think how far Si Spurrier's Black Knight mini had gone. It hadn't gone for very long. So I didn't know, for example, until after my initial pitch that like Jax, his daughter, was going to be in the situation as another Black Knight. I think I had been told after I said, well, what about Black Knight? And Tom said, yeah, he's in Eternals, definitely use him. But FYI, there's going to be a second Black Knight running around with the Ebony Blade. And I was kind of like, oh, okay. I didn't know anything about that. But I said, can we have Black Knight in the leather jacket? And I was told, yeah, so we just paid for a redesign on this character. So we're gonna need you to use that redesign.
That hurts.
Like, yeah. I was like, okay. And I think really all credit to Carlos, because Carlos made it look spectacular.
Oh yeah, he looks amazing in the book.
He did a really great job with it. But I was told like, oh yeah, you can use the photonic blade. I will say that now I can say it because it's out. The one I think I got 2 notes for my very first issue, and one of them was about Deathlock, which actually helped me settle on his catchphrase about like prepare to be erased. Because I think I'd written like prepare for termination or something like that, and Tom was like, oh, it kind of makes me flinch to like have Deathlock like outright threatening to kill people. Like, can you? And I was like, prepare to be erased is like a nice euphemism. Like, that beat in issue 8 where I have Ultron shatter the Ebony Blade.
Yes.
Which that was originally a beat in issue 1. That was originally going to be Deathlock breaking that Ebony Blade. And I was like, we could play that up as like an ongoing subplot. And Tom was kind of like, it seems a little strong for even like a gamma powered spider Deathlock to do. And also like he's like, we have Jax, so just we'll give her the Ebony Blade, don't worry about it. And when we got back to Avengers Mansion in issue 6, with the whole Avengers arsenal, I said, Tom, could I have Ultron shatter the Ebony Blade? And he's kind of like, yeah, sure, go for it. Like, it's, I think it's a little different. You get a little more wiggle room when it's not the prime Ebony Blade. That's going to like impact other stories down the line. And also, I think it fit much better in this context where it just shows that like Ultron's unstoppable. Like, he is he's an unstoppable 2099 robot. Like that. Like, yeah, he's strong enough that he can shatter the Ebony Blade, and have Ebony Blade shrapnel like hit Dane in the face. Like, yeah, that's a fun beat. But yeah, that leather jacket, I remember I tried to get it into issue 7 when they're breaking into the prison, and I don't blame Carlos. Carlos was 100% right on this. Carlos was like, well, like, don't you want to like keep them in like hoods, so they're not like so obvious? And I was like, yeah.
I guess.
And so we weren't able to put in the bomber jackets. But I was like, there's gonna be some fans that are mad at me for this. And I tried, but there was no way to fit it in.
I won't say I'm mad, but all I can say is maybe slip Carlos a little note, like, hey, put it in the background of this scene. I mean, hey, even just like on a clothes rack in the back, I'll be happy with that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I wish we were able to fit it in. Maybe another time. I feel like my business with Black Knight cannot be considered complete until I have him in a leather jacket. So I feel like that's going to be something that I bug my editors about for years now.
That's your new bucket list book there.
Yeah. All jacketed Avengers.
Yeah, all jacket Avengers. I love it. So we mentioned it quickly, but I want to deep dive into this. I got it for my own personal. Miles Morales.
Yeah.
Making him Deathlock. What a twist. You son of a glitch. How did you think of that, first of all? And second of all, I want to know, so obviously it's super cool that you chose Miles as the Deathlock, but it got me thinking, when you did that, you must have had to think, well, now that means I have to kill Miles Morales. So how did you kind of go through that process and like kind of come up with how you were gonna kill one of the characters that you're bringing back, making your kind of one of the main characters?
So when I had initially pitched the series, I didn't even have a specific Deathlock in mind, but I was just like, I know there's like, there's Deathlock army. I know they're from the far future. I didn't even know that Jason Aaron was doing a whole lot with Deathlocks in his Avengers run at the time, because that hadn't come out yet. Like when I pitched it to Tom, he's like, yeah, I think we might have to thread the needle a little bit to make sure we're not stepping on what Jason's doing, but I think this actually works out great. And the first thing I said to Tom was, I said, the cool thing about a Deathlock is they can be anybody, and we can stack whatever powers we need to on whatever tech we want. I remember we talked a little bit about it in the first issue, where he's got like Taskmaster fight software, and he's got I was originally, his blade was going to be made out of carbonadium, so it was going to like interfere with like a healing factor. We never really got to talk about it in the thing, but and like the invisibility, cloak of it all. And I had originally pitched him as War Machine. I pitched him as Rhodes.
Okay.
Thinking that he'd be from like a universe, or even not even necessarily a universe, but just, War Machine died at Thanos' hands, and maybe these are the parts that didn't come back.
Ooh, I like that.
The very first thing I ever pitched to Tom Brevoort was, I think it was like 2017, was I had asked him, I wanted to do a Deathlock story. And this was before Bendis brought Rhodes back. And I was thinking that could be a cool way to bring him back. And then Bendis kind of brought him back right before he left Iron Man. And so I kind of left it hanging. And Tom, in his wisdom, said, well, it's not bad like character wise, but like it doesn't really add anything power wise. Like, do you have any other ideas for like something that could add some power to it? And I thought a little bit about it, and then like the idea kind of hit me, and I was just like, are they gonna let me get away with this? As I said, Miles has a really interesting suite of powers. He's got the spider strength, he's got the wall crawling, he's got spider sense in theory. He's got but on top of that, he's got the invisibility and the venom blast. And like, you add that to whatever cyborg tech you want, and that's a guy who could beat up a super team single-handedly. And I'm a big fan of Miles Morales. If you check out Miles's Wikipedia page, you might actually see a quote from me on there. I reviewed his very first issue for Newsarama when it came out. So I was one of the very first reviews of Miles Morales, and I was a big fan of him.
That is so cool.
So it was kind of nice. And then between that and like, I think everybody has extra affection for Miles after Spider-Verse, and so I was kind of like, that like, again, one of those like, is this too big for me to be like writing a Spider-Man? And so I remember saying to Tom, I was like, if we treated it really respectfully, like have his death be like a big Barry Allen moment. What do you think about that? And Tom was like, yeah, I'm into that. I think that could really work. And so there's only, trying to think of how I can explain this without some minor spoilers for stuff that hasn't happened yet. But I can say, as far as figuring out how we killed off Miles, like I said, Barry Allen's death was kind of the blueprint for how we.
And I can totally, now that you say that, I totally see where that comes from for sure.
Yeah, it was very much, it was sort of a mashup between Barry Allen's death and the leap of faith scene from the Spider-Verse film.
Oh wow! You are a genius, David. Jesus.
If you read some of the, like when he dies, he says, he ended his life as he lived it, with a leap of faith. And
genius, David. Genius. Jesus, man, come on.
I what I can say is there was a bit of Marvel lore that kind of steered me in the direction of Annihilus. I can't really spoil what it is, because I think we might have a little Easter egg nod to it in issue 10. But when I thought of Annihilus, I was just like, oh, that's like a perfect character for like Miles to sacrifice. You know, it's bug versus bug essentially. But it's sort of Annihilus is like the polar opposite of Miles. Like Miles is, for all his spider abilities, I think the thing everybody loves about him is he's such a human character, with all the foibles that would entail of being kind of a teenage boy who's following in some huge footsteps and kind of figuring out, can I do that? Am I allowed to make any of this my own? And Annihilus is the opposite. He is as inhuman as it gets. He's all about those kind of very animal urges of like killing and domination. And so pitting them against each other, and also Annihilus is just, he's big, he's one of those big Marvel villains. He's got a whole empire that ripped up all of Marvel Cosmos for several years. So yeah, it was kind of and also just having the idea of the cosmic rod being kind of like, oh yeah, like I bet if that thing exploded, it would not be good. And it felt very easy to get Miles as sort of the ignition switch for that cosmic bomb. That was a challenging issue just to kind of structure, but I'm very proud of how it came together. I think it's probably one of the more experimental issues we've done of that series. It certainly went off the beaten path where we suddenly are like shoving in like sci-fi aliens, bug aliens from outer space for this, what had been like a sword and sorcery, limited sci-fi elements. But I think, I love writing issues like that. I find that those are the issues of mine that probably get the worst review. But I loved it. Right. And so I'll never stop writing them because like you get to kind of add a little bit of something extra that you wouldn't expect to add to your plate on a book like Savage Avengers. And and it's just, it's a nice kind of fun twist. And it really gets into it becomes a character piece on top of an action thing. And I think we kind of followed in that footsteps a little with issue 9 that recently came out on Punisher 2099. And those are the issues that are really, those are always my favorite to write.
Yeah, and I mean, with a character like Miles, like you're saying, his sacrifice has to be big for a character big like Miles. And I think you absolutely nailed it. And like you just said too, like the kind of parallels with Punisher 2099 as well when you get to issue 9. I mean, you just write these kind of emotional beats so well. And I mean, I don't know how you do it, but it really hits right here in the heartstrings.
I'm trying to make you cry, so I'm glad it did.
Well, you're close, man. You're close.
That's usually whenever I approach a script, I think the first question I ask is, can I make somebody cry with this? It doesn't have to be like a sad cry. Sometimes it can be just an emotional cry or like I think I would rather you feel something. And that's sort of where I'm usually going from. And then beyond that, sort of as a distant second, I'm like, can I make somebody laugh? And so oftentimes, like, especially like Flash and Cloak kind of trading insults at each other, I'm like, that's funny to me. And that kind of stays with me a lot longer than some of the action beats. Flash calling Cloak Linus. Like I was like, please let this pass legal. It just makes me laugh. So yeah, that's kind of like usually what I'm going for in all of my books. Because I feel like Scott Snyder told me this, is that like, look, sometimes things happen with the plot that like it's not, maybe you gotta, things get glossed over. Maybe you have to hope the reader will just take the leap with you. But I think they are much more inclined to do so if there's an emotional core. Like making somebody feel something about the book, they will forgive a lot. And so that's really the first thing I'm always trying to think of is just what's the emotion behind all this? Because then I think readers will be more invested and want to stick around for the long haul.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we're all here for, those emotional moments. That's why we connect with comics, right? So I wanted to add, before we get off, we gotta, start wrapping this up a little bit. I don't want to keep you, I could keep you all day if it's okay with you, but for your own sake, I know you're a busy guy, but before we get off Savage and get into just some more basic common questions, I did want to ask you real quick. I noticed that you like to explain your projects or tease your projects with like movies. So like we were talking about Fantastic Four, you described it as Die Hard in the Baxter Building, and you've described the first arc of Savage Avengers as Terminator versus Conan. Like that's kind of what the blueprint idea was.
Yeah.
I know you can't give too much away, and you've already given us some great nuggets here already. But if you could, is there a movie and or kind of combination of movies that this next arc is inspired by, or is that too much?
Well, for arc two,
For arc three, I meant arc two. Didn't you say that's Terminator 2?
Yeah, that's Terminator 2. So, well, so I guess I can say this. I don't know when this is going out, but I assume it'll be after Final Order cutoff. I had not made this public, but issue 10 is the last issue of Savage Avengers. I had pitched this as 2 arcs, and I had sort of a third idea in my back pocket, just in case, like the demand was insane. But like I had pitched this as sort of we go to the past and then we go to the future, and while I did have an idea in the back pocket for like a third location to go to. This is, we are kind of telling the story as I had envisioned it, and we are ending it the way that I had envisioned it. So it's really, I'm a big believer in like you want to leave the audience wanting more, and I think one of the reasons that I have not sort of been like just kind of saying from the rooftops from the jump, being like, hey, issue 10 is the last issue, like you really don't want to miss out. It's kind of a sad industry reality that I have learned, is that retailers tend to slash their orders if you tell them this is a final issue. And so that's not something that I tend to comment on in public. Also because Twitter, they speculate and you could exhaust yourself trying to correct the record on every single person who gets it wrong.
Yeah.
As I saw with the Conan news, is that I can't tell you how many people, when the Conan news broke, asked me, is my book canceled? Is my book getting pulped? Are you losing Conan? Every single issue in the first arc, somebody would say, well, they just wrote out Conan. I'm like, no, I didn't write out Conan in until I wrote him out, and so and it's also one of those things. The great thing about working at a place like Marvel is that like a lot of ideas don't really die. You just keep them in your back pocket. And I can tell you that like the idea that I had for a third arc, this wasn't the right time for it. I think just as far as sales and as far as everything else was concerned, this was the right time to step off. But I do know my editors liked the idea a lot. And so it's something that I've sort of been keeping in my back pocket for the right time. Never say never. I mean, look, if the demand is there and enough people want more Savage Avengers, of course I would be first, and I would love to write more. But like I said, if I have to choose between leaving readers wanting more and readers saying, okay, I've had enough, like this guy's welcome, I would much rather the former than the latter. And I think it's a weird time in the industry right now. I think it's a little volatile out there, and so any series that's getting more than 5 issues, I mean, it's kind of a victory, especially for a first-time Marvel writer. And like I've said, Marvel's been keeping me very busy. There's a lot more coming in the May solicits and beyond. So what I will say is, so you don't feel like I'm not giving you an answer, I will tell you one movie that really has influenced an upcoming thing that I've got going on is Inception.
Okay.
So,
okay. I love it.
You'll hear more about that later in the year. But that's sort of my, at least at this juncture, my big thing that I'm working on right now. I'm really enjoying myself. I think if readers are enjoying what I'm doing here in Savage Avengers, I think same level of intensity. But all good things come to an end, and I will say, having seen what we've done for this second arc, this final arc of Savage Avengers, I'm super proud of it. I really I don't really think there's anything I'd change. Uh, no, you know what? The only thing I would change is I don't know if I would have had the option to do 30 pages for the first issue if I had asked. I don't know if Marvel had started that yet. I would have loved to have done another 10 pages in that first issue, just to give it more room. But I'm really happy with how it turned out, and we are ending this series exactly as I intended. We're not changing anything. So really the only thing would have been like, oh, I could have thrown in like another arc's worth of like fun action sequences and
The leather jacket.
Or a leather jacket. I will say the lead that I would have had stepping in would have been really interesting. I suppose I can spoil this without spoiling any of the big ideas. It would have been a Thor.
What? Come on, David. Thor, come on. What?
But
that's amazing.
Never say never. This thing may exist, may come to exist down the road. So I'm never gonna say never.
And I like how you said a Thor. I'll just point that out there.
So yeah, I will say, that was something that I had discussed with everything with Conan. We sort of put heads together for a little bit to make sure, like, hey, do we, knowing that we'd have to write Conan out, do we still want to do this? I was like, yeah, I still want to do it if I can. But I remember thinking in like, oh, if I have to come up with backup plans. And I remember on the short list there was Scar, Son of the Hulk. And then there was a Thor, an angle involving a Thor that would have been pretty cool. But I'm very happy with how this turned out. The way that it turned out, I wouldn't have changed it for the world. But there's a multiverse out there where
exactly anything's possible,
baby.
That
alternate angle existed.
Well, literally last week in the group chat, I was saying how much I'd love it if you got to write Beta Ray Bill and Throg.
Yes.
That is crazy.
I was gonna poke fun at you. I was gonna poke fun a little bit at you too, because I noticed that you didn't mention Thor in your early comics, and I also saw that you mentioned you'd love to work with Dodderman on interiors. So I mean, a proposed Dodderman Thor, that it writes itself in my mind.
I'd love to write Thor. I'm not writing Thor. I'll just put that out there. I'm not writing Thor. That would be news to me if I was.
Yeah.
But
you didn't know?
I do have some Thor ideas that I think would be pretty fun. And so if there was ever room to get called up to the plate for that, that is something I actually would be pretty ready for. So
I know you would.
I don't know what the creative team status is on Thor right now. I don't know who it is. But yeah, I mean, if they ever called me up to the plate, I would love to do like a Jason Aaron length on Thor. I think there's some really cool ideas.
David, don't tease me like this, man. Don't tease me. Come on.
Yes. So maybe someday, but not. It's not on the horizon for me at this moment. But yeah, when you were talking about when you're talking about Throg and Beta Ray Bill, I was just like, yeah, it would be fun to write.
Well, you said earlier that when people mention these characters, your mind starts to race. So let's just right now, Beta Ray, Throg, we're just putting that in the zeitgeist for you there.
I would love to. They Will Moss knows where to find me. Yes, anytime.
Beautiful. So before we get out of here, we wanted to just ask you a couple, basic. You're also a comic fan as opposed to just a comic writer.
Yeah.
So Cap, you want to shoot us off with our kind of just random comic questions?
Yes. Is there a dream character / story you would like to write?
Boy, well, I'd love to write Doctor Strange. I would love to write Doctor Strange. Shazam. If I got any work over at
Interesting.
Superman, Flash, Iron Fist. I think I have an idea for like an arc for Iron Fist.
I think you would
I have a
slap on
Spider-Man
Iron
idea
Fist.
that I'd love to write. I might have to see if I can pitch that once I clear my decks a little more. Iron Man would be really fun.
Did I hear Steve Rogers too?
You know what? I've been kind of tinkering in an idea for Steve for a while. I've just been thinking about, again, that question of Brubaker is such a huge influence, as this shadow looms so large over Cap, and it's kind of like, is there anything that can be done to free him from that? I guess that makes it sound like it's oppressive. It's not oppressive. It's, you know, like Ed is such, you know, he's a genius, and but it's just, you know, where do you go with these characters? I think that's an ongoing question I have. Where do you go with these characters when there's such a perfect run on them? Where do you go with them that's not just a cover band version of them, of that perfect run?
Would it not make it harder to write a story given how there's such a standard already?
It makes it much harder. It makes it so hard to like find, and that's why it's like but I think ultimately you have to kind of break the cycles a little bit, because otherwise it becomes so self-referential that it becomes a little difficult to get into. And so, you know, you think of like, you try to think of ways that things could be really different. Like, that's why I'm really like, and my idea that I have for Thor would be very different than anything that has really been touched upon before. And so I'd love to do something in that vein. Like, you know what, the big case study I would say is like House of X and Powers of X, you know, like Krakoa era X-Men, where I'm constantly thinking like, what are they going to do next? You know, like it's such uncharted territory, and that's what I really want to do out of these books. And that's something that I really want to build on as a creator in my skill set. Is I want to take people so far off the beaten path that they're just constantly like, where are we? This is so cool. I want to know, like I can't even possibly anticipate what's next. I mean, who possibly could have known that when the X-Men all die on the Orcus station, that not only were they going to be brought back instantly, but that was the cornerstone of the new era, that death just doesn't happen to mutants anymore, that it doesn't stick, that they have beaten death. That rules, you know.
Yeah,
like
that's so cool.
You know, like that, and like everything that Krakoa does. I respect the hell out of Hickman. Those books got me through the pandemic, and I would love to see more of that. And I know that is a difficult thing to do because fans can be a little conservative, you know, like they have an expectation.
A little.
They have expectations that are usually rooted in something that you're not going to get back, you know. Like I love Jerry Dugan's run on Savage Avengers. Jerry ended his run, you know, like it does nobody any good to try to rehash what Jerry did. You know? And I had a lot of fans who were really mad, being like, well, Jerry's run was so good, why would you end it and give it to this guy? And it was like, I don't think it was quite like that. Like, I'm sure that it was just probably Jerry had other things, you know. Jerry's writing X-Men, Jerry's writing Iron Man, you know, and I'm sure they were like, we're 28 issues in, maybe if we relaunch, you know, we're gonna get like a nice pop in sales, you know. Or maybe it's just Marvel saying, hey, we like this guy David Pepose, and you know, we have this book opening, let's see what he can do. He loves doing mashups. This is our mashup book. I don't know.
Or shut up, loser. I'm doing it.
I think doing more stuff like that is the thing that interests me the most as a reader and as a creator. But it's tough. You have to really dig in, because it'd be a lot easier to just be doing like, you know, the methadone version of you know, somebody else's great run. And the problem is that you'll never reach the same heights as that great run. And yeah, you'll get some nice nostalgia going, but like, I think the nostalgia will only carry you so far. So So Steve's really interesting, and I there are some really interesting angles for him in his past that I haven't quite cracked in my head yet, but I think there are a lot of things that are unspoken about him that I'd like to speak about, and not bad things, but I just think, so I don't know. Cap's such an interesting bird. I love him. Like I said, everything I write kind of turns into a team book, and so I love Cap as like the leader of the Avengers, and like, and so it's tricky for me to see him like, well, what's Cap when he's not leading the Avengers? Because I'm always like, let Avengers rule. That's all I want to talk about. So I think I've got an angle for him somewhere. And you watch, like, after I rattle off all these other characters, I'm like, I'd love to tackle this one. Like, watch like watch me like try to write something with Captain America in a few years, and it's like, oh, see, the thing continued. But yeah, great character, and I think a lot of untapped potential. Which is weird to say for like a flagship character, but you see like the way that Chris Evans like really kind of tapped into the national consciousness in a big way, based on like how outspoken he was with his politics during a time where like a lot of terrible stuff was going on. And I don't know, I feel like there's got to be a way to make people feel that way about Steve. Like Steve Rogers is a character, not just like idealistic in the abstract, but like, how do you make somebody like really feel who Steve Rogers is like a paragon of a good person? And I think Colin and Jackson are doing a great job with that over in Sentinel of Liberty.
Yep.
Yeah. Sam is symbol of truth. So they're doing a terrific job with it, and honestly, like, that anybody who writes Captain America should be taking notes from them, because they're doing a really terrific job.
Absolutely. We love it over here. We feel that.
Yeah, and they're great guys.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying they're great guys to boot. Jackson, Colin, just terrific guys.
Cat got a on it since it came out, and we cannot stop reading it either. So that's certainly sentimental over here on our end.
Yeah, it's a great run.
I think our final question
for both
to you is before we get out of here, we just got one left, and it's we all live in the age of the MCU, and you went from being someone reading comics, right, at home before this idea of the MCU even existed, right? We've all grown up, and now we live in the reality where, for us as readers, when we read, sometimes we have to think to ourselves, is this something we might see on screen in 10 to 15 years? But for you, is now writing for Marvel, it's almost a reality that in 10 to 15 years, what you write today could affect what happens on the big screen later. How does that feel, David? How does it feel?
That's kind of you to say. I haven't felt like I've written anything yet that would do that. And so that takes a little bit of pressure off me. That I'm not thinking like, oh, could they bring this to the screen? I mean, if they want to, I'm not going to say no. If they want to bring Weapon H, turn in all sorts of Hulks on the screen, God bless. But like, that is kind of the benefit of writing. Like, I'm writing, the characters that nobody's really giving a lot of consideration to, and a lot of them are spinoffs. A lot of them are very ancillary. Or like in the case of like Black Knight, I guess. I mean, I loved writing Dane, but I don't think I added anything to like his continuity that like somebody else didn't already set the decks up for. So I don't think too hard about like, will they turn this into a movie? But if anything, my thinking is kind of like, okay, there are a lot more people who've watched the movies out there than are reading the books. And my mission is kind of to write something that those people who are kind of more casual about it, like, all right, you especially Avengers Unlimited, it's like, okay, like, that's why like I threw in the I can do this all day, line in there.
Yeah.
People, like, first off, how often am I going to get the opportunity to do that? The answer is not often. But secondly, there is clearly a demand for these characters. And I think the problem is that a lot of times the comics themselves can be so self-referential that it can be difficult for those same movie fans to get in and be like, hey, I want an experience like I watched Infinity War. Where can I read something that's like that?
Mm-hmm.
And, I understand exactly the impetus where people, people were complaining all the time about Hickman's Avengers run while the Joss Whedon movie came out. And 3 movies later, they are drawing from Jonathan Hickman's Avengers run for the next Avengers movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can't complain too much. But I think, like, I can say, like, not the next thing. Something I have coming down the pike. I specifically was like, hey, there's an MCU element that I would like to bring in. Because I think that could be like a nice way to kind of like be an ambassador for people who saw this thing.
Yeah.
And so, it's a balancing act, and it's one that I often discuss with my editors a lot. Like, I had a beat in Avengers Unlimited where I had originally written it in the script. I think it was that last chapter that I wrote where Black Panther and Iron Man are going through a laser grid.
Mm-hmm.
And I had written originally in the script that like Iron Man like morphs his armor to form a shield. And Tom had to kind of like gently be like, that's really more of an MCU thing. Like, that's not really something that like Tony's doing in the books. And it's like, or, I remember I wrote something about like arc reactors, and like they're like, that's really an MCU thing. That's not really but you have to, it's not to say there's no way to cross-pollinate, but you just have to be aware of it. And not assume that it's already been seeded in the comics. Sometimes you kind of have to do the seeding on your own. But I think, there should be a symbiosis that like the movies can draw from the comics. And then sometimes when the movies kind of add something totally popular that's brand new, why not incorporate them into it?
Yeah.
I mean, was Tony Stark really like as snarky in the comics before Robert Downey Jr. showed up?
Absolutely not.
No, definitely not.
But I think that's something that's made the character more engaging and dynamic. And fun. So why not incorporate that? And I think we're going to see it hopefully now, like Sam Wilson is Captain America in the MCU.
Damn right he is.
I think that's going to only reinforce Sam's status as Cap in the comics, so yeah, I never see it as anything antagonistic towards one another. I only see it as value add. But yeah, for me, I haven't gotten to that point yet. Only because look, my Fantastic Four story, for example, there's going to be a lot of other Fantastic Four stories that Marvel's going to want to tell on the big screen before they tell Die Hard in the Baxter Building. If I got a long run on something, maybe that's a different story. Maybe they'll borrow something from it. But I don't know. I also feel like a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is sort of so out of left field, which is great. But I think that means that as far as multimedia translation is concerned, they would probably wait a few movies before they started doing any of my ideas. And you know what? No harm, no foul. I would love to be in that conversation one of these days. But for now, really, my biggest thing is just how do I be the best ambassador I can for the books? And if that means borrowing some elements from the MCU, so be it. But otherwise, it's just really just trying to tap into that emotional core and balance it out with just what are some fun ways to use these powers and abilities in this world in a way that people will feel like they got their $4 or $5 worth.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's super interesting to hear you kind of talk about how you wanted to add something from the MCU to the books, but they were kind of that's more of a separate, that's MCU stuff. I never really thought of it like that. And that's really fascinating, at least for someone like me. Like I said, I never really thought about that, but I would think it's more cohesive, I guess. I thought it would be.
Well, I should say it's not that there's no room to incorporate it into. It's a matter of to use the arc reactor example, for a moment. I had just kind of figured that I had just assumed that was in the book already. That had been introduced in Iron Man's main title. And so it's oh no, that's not what they call it in the comics. Or or like Iron Man morphing his suit into into a shield or something. Like that's not something that at least when I wrote it was during Cantwell's run. Like that's just not how Tony's suit works in comics. And it's not to say that if Jerry Dugan decided, hey, I want to do, Tony with nanotech armor, that can morph around and do whatever, I'm sure he could introduce that into his book and then everybody else can run with that. But until he does, or whoever, Jason Aaron or now Jed, writing Avengers, I'm sure if they introduced one of those two guys introduced it, that would be like fair game. But like they're not going to let me introduce that in like Avengers Unlimited. So
got it. Yeah.
So it's just it's sort of a chain of continuity command, so to speak. And it usually starts in what I would imagine the character's main title, or maybe you introduce that in a big team book like the flagship Avengers book. But like Avengers Unlimited, that's not going to be the thing that sets the continuity for the rest of the universe. Those are adventures that are set in the continuity that the rest of the universe provides. And so that's sort of, that's not even just an MCU versus Marvel Comics thing. That's just how comics work.
Yeah. Wow.
Well,
that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on with us today, David. You're our first guest. We're blessed to have you. It's been awesome for us to get to nerd out with somebody who writes comics. It's been more than a pleasure.
A professional nerd.
Go tell everybody where to find you or what to look forward to on their pull list that you're writing.
Yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at PeposeD, or David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews, or visit my website at davidpepose.com. And let's see. Final order cutoff for Savage Avengers 10 will probably be over by the time this goes live. But you can pre-order the second volume trade, Escape from Nueva York. You can pre-order that at your local comic shop. That's coming out in May. And then keep an eye out the next Marvel solicits, because you'll see some more stuff with me in that, and then in the coming months to come.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, David. We are beyond excited for everything you got coming on. While we are sad that Savage unfortunately has to come to an end, we cannot wait to see what comes out from Papa Savage himself coming later this year. And again, I just want to reiterate what Gorgon already said. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been absolutely phenomenal and so much fun. And we can't thank you enough for giving us your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. Well, that's all we got for everybody today. Thank you all for watching, and we will catch you all next time.
Do this all day.